Hello everyone, today I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada, and today's topic is who is the laziest country in the world? And the answer to this question may not be as easy as it seems. The so-called popular media may have us believe it's the United States, especially here where I'm filming in Las Vegas. But no, Las Vegas may be a place of leisure, but it's rather short term in nature, for vacations, of course, for people who work. The laziest country in the world is very likely halfway around the world in the Middle East, or more specifically, the Gulf states. Now, you wouldn't really think of the laziest country being here with the extreme climate and scorching summer heat and humidity, but that's okay because you won't find any of the card-holding citizens in Kuwait, Qatar, or the Emirates actually doing any of the hard work. That is what the imported foreigners are for. Let's take a look at Qatar, for example. Population 2.8 million. That sounds like a rather small country. However, it gets even smaller when you consider only about 300,000 of those 2.8 million people are card-holding citizens. The rest are imported labor brought in to do all the jobs the Qatari nationals don't want to do. These foreign workers make up nearly all of Qatar's workforce, or an estimated 94%. So what kind of work does the foreign labor do? There are approximately 180,000 foreign household servants in Qatar, which works out to about 2 servants for every Qatari household. Housework, or really any kind of work, does not appear to be very popular in Qatar. Also, construction. At the peak leading up to the World Cup in 2022, there were nearly 1 million foreign construction workers employed at building infrastructure used in the 2022 World Cup Olympics. There are also several 100,000 more foreign workers to support the food and retail industries, as well as skilled foreign workers for everything from school teachers to engineers for Qatar's oil and gas industries. And offhand, this might not sound so bad. I mean, what's wrong with outsourcing nearly all your jobs? And when I say all, what I mean is that you will not find a Qatari citizen working at, say, McDonald's or at a grocery store or almost any other kind of service job for that matter. Nearly all those jobs are done by foreigners. And you might say, well, what is wrong with that? Maybe the Qatari citizens are just too busy working at the state-run oil business to be bothered with working at, say, McDonald's. And besides, all these millions of foreigners are getting paid, right? Well, sort of. The state-sanctioned minimum wage in Qatar is approximately $500 per month. And their work weeks, unlike in the West in the US, which are 40 hours, theirs are 48-hour work weeks. So that works out to about $2.60 per hour. And if the employer provides food and housing, which is at their discretion, of course, then the minimum wage drops to only $300 per month. Now you might be asking, but who would work for such low wages? Well, apparently the world has a surplus labor force as millions of workers travel to the Gulf states from countries such as India, Pakistan, the Philippines, Kenya, and Ethiopia, just to name a few. And where you are from likely will determine how well you will be treated. For example, if you are from a European country and working in a white-collar job such as engineering, there are relatively few complaints against Qatari employers. However, if you are from a poor third world country and work in a blue-collar industry, the chances you will be exploited, or even worse, increase substantially. For example, in 2018, the Philippines government banned its citizens from working in Kuwait after thousands of complaints of abuse and the death of a Philippines housekeeper in Kuwait at the hands of her employer. This ban was later lifted after Kuwait agreed to stop the practice of allowing employers to keep the passports of their employees, thus making them almost unwilling captives, as you cannot leave the country without a passport. Under the new guidelines, Philippine workers are now entitled to have a cell phone for worker safety, room and board paid for by their employer, and to have 1 day off per week. Now, this all sounds good, especially the 1 day off per week. However, the state minimum wage in Kuwait is still only $250 per month. Though the free room and board does offset some of the low salary, it's not unusual to hear horror stories of foreign laborers living in rather squalid conditions. Meanwhile, in other Gulf states such as the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, there is no state-sanctioned minimum wage, as the law only states that employee wages must cover their basic needs, but obviously this is very subjective. The foreign labor situation in the Gulf more resembles a form of modern-day slavery, and it sometimes has very fatal consequences. In the lead up to the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, it's estimated that between 5,000 to 6,000 foreign workers were killed in work-related accidents building the stadium and other infrastructure required for the Olympic event. Many of the casualties were thought to be completely preventable and were caused by prolonged exposure to the intense desert heat, with temperatures in Qatar known to reach into the 130s when the high humidity is factored into the heat index, which in simpler terms is what the outdoor temperature really feels like. Also contributing to the high death toll of foreign workers is the excessive use of manual labor, such as hauling building materials by hand up multiple floors in the intense heat, with the tragic consequence of laborers simply dropping dead on the job from heat stroke. And it doesn't look like Qatari employers really even care when employees die. There is no OSHA equivalent like in the United States. That's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which would very likely be closing down most of these job sites and issuing huge fines if the same conditions existed in the US. So for all the people back home who want less government regulation, please take note here and look at what happens when the government is not there to protect the workers. Have you ever heard of the expression, "you haven't got a Chinaman's chance"? That would be referring to the Chinese laborers who helped build the railroads in the US and were given the most dangerous jobs, such as dynamiting tunnels, with many of the Chinese being killed on the job. And what happens if workers in the Gulf states band together to protest their working conditions, such as what has happened in other developed countries in the West? Well, the answer to that is they can't. All forms of protest are illegal, even if you are protesting not being paid, which apparently happens quite often. For example, in 2022, following construction of the World Cup in Qatar, approximately 60 workers protesting unpaid wages were arrested, jailed, and then deported. The government of Qatar acknowledged the workers were unpaid and stated the workers would eventually be paid. However, that didn't stop them from being arrested and deported for breaking Qatari law. Yes, apparently the law against protesting is more important than not being paid by your employer for several months, and not to mention that the wages that these construction workers are getting paid are so meager They're at the bottom end, closer to that minimum wage of $500 per month. So these are just slave wages for the kind of work that they're doing. And what's interesting about this is some of the deported workers were from other Muslim countries such as Pakistan, and one would think fellow Muslims would receive somewhat better treatment, but apparently not. So back to the original question, who is the laziest nation of them all? The Gulf states of the Middle East not only take laziness to a whole new level, but they have also perfected the art of using other people by literally replacing their entire workforce with foreigners and paying them third world poverty wages, which ensures the rich Qataris will stay rich and the poor workers from third world countries will continue to stay poor. So if they're not working, what exactly do Qatari citizens do, might you ask? Well, apparently not much. The ruling family appears to like hobbies such as horse racing, yachting, and fashion. This is the Emir of Qatar, Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, who basically holds dictatorial powers and is one of the richest people in the world, the primary source of his family's wealth being the state oil industry. However, the Qatari government does seem rather good at spreading the wealth around somewhat to the remaining 300,000 Qatari card-holding citizens whose average salary is approximately 4,000 US dollars per month. Now, this might not sound like much compared to many in the United States or even in European countries. However, that is still over 8 times what the average foreign worker earns in Qatar. Popular jobs for Qatari citizens earning a livable wage appear to be in the state-run oil business as well as other governmental jobs. And though most Qatari card-holding citizens might not be millionaires or even billionaires like the ruling elite, the average wage of $4,000 per month does allow them to live pretty well here in Qatar. And back to the elites, other popular hobbies include the arts as well as fashion. And here is one of the princesses of Qatar. Qatar has quite a few princesses, as the wealthy are permitted to have multiple wives. And this is Princess Al Mayeza Al Thani, who is the sister of the current emir, and she has a rather interesting job as the co-chair of the Fashion Trust of Arabia, and she runs the Qatar Museum as well. And Princess Al Mayeza is said to know a lot about fashion as well as the arts. It's said that her yearly budget at the Qatar Museum is over $1 billion per year, which is probably more than the entire state of Qatar has given to charitable causes. And of course, this money could probably be used for much better purposes, such as improving the living conditions of their foreign workers. But the Qataris probably don't care very much about things like that. Anyhow, on a fashion level, I find some of her outfits a little kind of bizarre. I mean, I know her family runs the country and she can wear anything she wants, but the whole time I was in Qatar, I don't think I ever saw anyone dressed quite like this. These are more outfits that I would expect to see at, say, Burning Man. But anyhow, I'm certainly not a fashion expert like she is. And hopefully something good will come out of all these horse races and fashion shows the elites in Qatar attend, such as other rich people should be telling the Qatari government to treat their foreign workers better, and at the very least, don't forget to pay them. Even the meager wages that they do make, don't rob from the poor. And Qatari law is supposed to be based upon Sharia law or the Quran, and I don't think Allah likes people who mistreat the poor. That is something the Muslim and Christian countries would have in common. Anyhow, that will conclude my video on the laziest country in the world, and thank you for watching.